Okay. I'll ask him to get back to you.
Report.
Okay.
No, listen. Morning, everyone. Good morning. Can you hear us okay on Zoom? Someone give me a thumbs up. We're just saying yes.
Yes, we can hear you.
Perfect. All right. Good morning. Thanks everyone for being here this morning. Today we have a presentation from Alison Green. She's the Defensible Space Coordinator with the Oregon State Fire Marshal. And we'll go ahead and get started with a couple of announcements. Well, first I just want to say, there'll probably be a lot of questions today. So if you're online, please remember to raise your hand. So
recording in progress.
Okay, please remember to raise your hand just so we can keep questions in line. It gets a little chaotic when everybody's answering or just speaking. And then I just want to remind everyone we're not going to have a December meeting. So this will be the last meeting of the year and we'll reconvene in January and start working on our new program of work and getting ideas for presentations for next year. And then Kevin, did you have something?
Yeah, just an update on the fuel reduction grant. We've processed 29 awards so far out of the 41 that we awarded. There's still probably at least a half dozen agreements that haven't been signed. So if you haven't signed your agreement, that was sent out with the email and the award. But if you, for some reason, can't find that link, just feel free to email me and I can get you the link to the agreement. We can't really process the award until you sign the agreement. So make sure that's complete. So yeah, on that, and then our next grant coming up will be our bin rental program. We kind of ran that as a pilot last year. We have 65,000 available, at least 65. We might have a little bit more than that, which equates to about roughly 26 communities. We are gonna turn that into an actual official application. It'll probably start mid-January to mid-February. Some of the rubrics with that will probably be, if there's communities that have high vulnerability, if they're designated firewise sites or they're high risk, those would probably be the ones we'll prioritize on that. And then we do have a CWPP meeting next Monday, correct?
Yes.
Next Monday, our East-West CWPP meeting. It's our second one for that. We're mostly going to be trying to just acquire data for that group. So if you are part of that group and some of the folks in this room and online are, please attend our meeting next Monday at 10 a.m. at the road department. That's what I have for updates.
And if you need any more information, you can go ahead and email me. I think it's more info on the CWPP meeting. So we'll go ahead and start with introductions. We'll start in the very back.
Hi, Randy Farkas, Plain Knolls Estates.
Betty Wicker, same.
Dominic City.
Jeff Randall, U.S. Community Wildfire Protection. Peter Walker from the University of Oregon.
Kyle Collins with the Deschutes County Planning Department.
Robin Church with Three Pines HOA and Summit West Neighborhood District Emergency Preparedness Lead.
Sherry Mullen, Widgie Creek Homeowners Association Firewise.
Joe Mowdy, Ben Park and Rec.
Sarah Hickman, Ben Park and Recreation District Natural Resources. Melissa Steele, Ben Fire and Rescue.
Morning, Gary Marshall, Deschutes County Fire District 2.
Bill Goose, Sun River Fire Department. Greg Brown, Deschutes River Woods.
And I'm Kevin Moriarty, Deschutes County Forester.
And Corinne Heiner, the Fire Adaptive Communities Coordinator. If you're joining us on Zoom, there's quite a few of you. Could you please do your introduction in the chat for me? Helps me with my notes so I can get attendance accurately. And then I believe Allison is joining us online. Are you with us on there, Allison?
I sure am. Good to see you all.
There you are. Morning.
Morning.
All right, so Allison is going to give us a nice little talk about the new code coming up and how that compares to Firewise. So if you want to go ahead and floor is yours.
I sure can. So I will start with a really, really brief introduction for folks that I have not met. So Alison Green, I currently serve as the Defensible Space Coordinator for Oregon State Fire Marshal. So essentially work at a statewide scale on some of the new authorities from 2021 that our agency was given around defensible space. I had every intention of meeting up with you all in person this morning, but we had some complications getting the tiny human to school and managing the time. So I am at home in Lapine, joining you from my kitchen table, but it's good to see virtually many of you. For folks that don't know, I was fortunate enough to coordinate Project Wildfire in a different life a few years ago. So it's kind of like homecoming week. Good to see many of you online. So I was going to start maybe with a little bit of kind of background for folks that don't know how the code came about, how it came to our agency, as it were, and then really dig into some differences between Firewise and kind of the underlying code of Firewise, and then, of course, the actual code language draft that we have. So in essentially 2021, following some really rugged fire seasons and quite a few meetings at the statewide level, there was Senate Bill 762 that passed in 2021, which is not news to anybody here. And so essentially what that bill in particular for Oregon State Fire Marshal gave us for authorities was authorities around supporting fire adapted communities. So Heather Miller, my amazing colleague, you guys get to see her on a really regular basis. So that happens at the regional scale rather than the county scale for them. It also gave us responsibilities around response. So all of my response folks in the room, you guys get to know our regional mobilization coordinators, as well as us being able to actually provide some capacity with saying like buying some apparatus for structural agencies that weren't able to purchase them themselves. And then of course, finally, the kind of last big bucket was this push and authority around defensible space. Not only asking for our agency to design a program that would support education, that would put together a statewide program around defensible space, but develop and adopt a code that would apply to certain lands that then would be identified on the map that ODF and OSU were developing at the statewide scale. So I would maybe talk just really quickly about the map. A lot of feedback in 2021 or 2022. It got pulled back. And so reworking it, I've actually got a few phone calls from folks in the room. The map has not been officially released. It sounds like the letters are supposed to go out soon. But that is really the only reason I bring it up is because it is where our code really hinges. I am not the expert on the map. I will not pretend to be an expert on the map. However, it is really what our code hinges on and when we can move forward with actually adopting that language into rule the same way we would do any other kind of fire code. The idea was that Defensible Space Code would live with us since our agency oversees the Oregon Fire Code statewide. So that's, things that apply to businesses and a whole bunch of other things. So they figured we had the structure to then adopt and manage a code around defensible space. So with that in mind, we also were given very specific language on what we were to use as code. We were not just kind of given a blank check, go develop a code, go forth, do good things. We were told that we were to use 2 chapters out of the International Code Council, the WUI Code, so ICC WUI Code, and it was chapters 603 and 604. We could adopt Oregon best practices, and I'll go into those a little bit, but our language was very clear, what we were given from the legislature, on what we were to use, and honestly, what kind of code framework we were to use. I think the original intent was that the rest of Oregon's fire code is based for ICC. And so it was something that folks were comfortable using. But again, that was something that we were given from the legislature. So I might pause there before I dig into specifics. Are there any questions on kind of how we got here? Y'all that know me know I'm not afraid of answering questions. I am here.
And so far, Allie.
Okay. So, and also don't feel free to interrupt me. I'm waiting for my coffee to sink in because I'm powered by a lot of it. So just let me know. So I would say a lot of folks had initial questions around the code. And so what I want to make sure that I am super clear about is that the intent of this code is to provide a base minimum standard for folks that meet that certain vulnerability or essentially hazard criteria to meet. It is not designed to be the end all be all. That is consistent around all fire code. It is the base minimum standard for safety. So we'll start there, right? It is looking at everything from tree spacing to how close the trees are to the house, as well as how far out the distance is. The biggest notable difference is that the high hazard, which is where the code will apply, will be 50 feet rather than the traditional 30 feet. That is the language that's required of us in ICC. So I would also talk around when we talk about FireWise, right? And the FireWise standards versus FireWise as a program, they go hand in hand, but they are two different things. Where the FireWise standards are based in NFPA code, and my amazing Gary Marshall can correct me, it's 1141, sir?
Well, they combine it, 41, 42, and 44, they combine them all now.
Yep, so.
It's not a code, it's a standard.
It's a standard, right? But so that is a completely different standard than, say, legislatively what we were required to use. So Bob, I saw your notes. Which ICC document is being quoted? I can send you a link. I will also tell you that a lot of the draft code language, I'll pop a PDF in there. That code language is verbatim from the ICC document. So I'll pop it in the link for folks to review. With the NFPA standards, I will say, compared to the ICC, the two chapters that we are required to use, it is actually much more prescriptive than the base minimum standard we were asked to develop. So everything from the 0 to 5 feet, which is not named in the ICC standards, all the way up to kind of the zones for home ignition, that is not named in the ICC standards. This is where the best practices come in. Knowing that a lot of the science that we all have been working from for 30, 40 years, which is making me feel old, but when we get to that same science, the NFPA one is much more prescriptive. We have to use language from ICC 603, 604, but we have the opportunity to put best practices in. So what we are looking at adding are language around shaded fuel breaks, because there are a lot of places where those are super, super helpful. So these will all be in appendices rather than in the code language that we're required to use. So we'll have shaded fuel breaks. We'll have recommendations around different ecosystems. We'll have recommendations around density and smaller areas. Right now, the recommendation is that it's 50 feet or to the property line. What happens when you have two homes in 50 feet? We do need some sort of language and best practice around super suburban or urban type of development. I would also say there is a conversation around how do we support locals if they want to adopt language locally that is more stringent than the base minimum standard. So that will also be something that we look at. Right now, there is an option in the Oregon Fire Code for folks to do that. And so we will have appendices for folks that may not meet the high hazard in the map, where it will be required by our agency that then they can adopt the appendice for local adoption. So there's some flexibility for local folks. With that said, I will say, we as an agency have been thinking a lot about what this does look like, knowing that the map is not out, knowing that a statewide code around defensible space is new to Oregon. This is going to be a new thing. We will not be pursuing rulemaking or adoption until after the map is out and the appeals are complete. And so this will be a piece that we'll do our best to dovetail it in once all of those appeals are complete. We will also have a stay on enforcement for quite some time. We are required in statute to enforce, but it does not tell us how we have to enforce. And that is another piece that we will be developing moving forward to make sure that we balance the shall enforce with the education that we know, frankly, is a lot more effective than doing things by force. And so that is also, this is the defensible space side of things. There is also a home hardening code that is not with our agency, is with our building codes division. They are following a similar adoption pattern. So once the map is out and then the appeals are complete, that is when they will also pursue their rulemaking moving forward. And so I would maybe, again, pause here, see what questions there are, because I can give a broad overview, but I'm happy to dig into this for folks. I really do want this to be a discussion.
Do you have any idea when the map will be released?
Oh gosh, my crystal ball is telling me true. So it was supposed to be released October 1. My understanding is that they were still collecting feedback and working on the mass mailing that is required to notify everybody. And granted, the notifications will only go to high hazard and wildland urban interface. Those will be the only folks receiving a letter. I'm hoping it is soon so folks can review their hazard. They can appeal if they need to. But we're 6 weeks out from October 1. So I don't have a hard and fast one. I wish I did, but I don't.
Yeah, I also got a question. I got a couple of questions.
Mhm.
Are we looking at also getting codes so that fire trucks, we got acre lots in Deschutes Woods, and to be able to get into the back, like the ability of fire trucks to get back there, because a lot of places only got like 10 foot. For new construction or something like that, they should be able to build 14 foot, I think is what you would like to have. So then, should there be something in the codes for that capability? Because I mean, some of these places you're talking, 200 feet back there. So
the Defensible Space Code is not going to address driveway width and access. So that will not be something in the Defensible Space Code.
okay. And the other item I was going to ask was, these guys might know, the irrigation canals are going to be piped, and they're also going to have maintenance roads. They got maintenance roads on some of it already. Are the trucks able to use those for fire prevention?
Oh gosh, I honestly don't know. I would look to some of the structural
I'm just
partners.
asking. I'm looking at this. I'm going, well, let's have.
Yes.
In the event of a wildfire, we're gonna use whatever roads we can get into.
Yeah.
If there's life safety, but as far as being good stewards of the land, like they'll have to abide by that as well.
Okay.
Code as well, if they're in high hazard and in the WUI.
Yeah, well, that's, we got, Arnold Canal going through
Right.
Deschutes Woods, so that, and they're gonna be piped, next year.
And that's only for a season. Piping, as far as water flowing through that pipe, it'll be seasonal. It won't be.
Right, but then also, the pipe's gonna be there forever, I mean,
Right. It's one of those things, maybe, Bill was in charge of operations for that fire and rescue. Some of you guys probably. What I've seen in the past, you have to carry extra apparatus for looking to sprinkler main lines, and every farmer, it seems like, has a different type of
Well, I'm just saying,
Yeah.
able to use the roads to be able to get to the different properties. You know, there's a lot of vegetation along.
Yeah, if those roads are available and gates are there, if we can get through the gates, we're gonna utilize that. But what the fire code says is that anytime a new structure is built and maintained for that matter, is that you have to get a fire truck within 150 feet of all exterior portions of the first floor of the building. The road has to be, you say 14 feet, but we need an unobstructed width of 20 feet. So a lot of times we'll allow 10 or 12 feet.
Sure.
But our apparatus is 10 feet beer to beer. It
Okay.
has to hold in a post load of 50,000 pounds.
Yeah.
Bridges, that's really important. Culverts, that's really important. All those things have to be signed so we know before we drive over it.
Yeah.
Yeah, so there's a
Well, but
lot to do with access.
What I was wondering was, is the irrigation, you know, are the canal roads capable of doing that?
A lot of times they are. We use other
I-
canal roads. I mean, there's a lot of different irrigation companies in Deschutes County,
Yeah.
and we use those roads.
Okay,
Yeah.
all right,
Yeah.
okay, thanks.
Okay, we got a few online. We're gonna start with Dean.
Yeah, I had to unmute myself. Good morning, Allison. Thank you for presenting today. This is Dean Richardson, Upper Deschutes River Communities. I have a question about the shaded fuel breaks. Could you elaborate a little bit about what that might look like in Deschutes County here?
I sure can. Thank you, Dean. It's good to see you online. So thank you for calling me out on that. Maybe this is where my coffee needed to set in. So when looking at the draft standards, which I popped them in the chat for folks to review later, it is calling for pretty prescriptive tree spacing. So 10 feet between trees 10 feet away from the house, where you know, us that have been doing this a long time recognize that something that black and white, that prescriptive, is not always necessary for every single ecotype. So here in the dry forest, the more sunlight you let down to the floor, that means more brush, more grass, all of those things. And also I think about, like, you know, my oak savanna folks that are down in Southwest Oregon, is making sure that if we don't have the very prescriptive 10 feet spacing, do we have a very clear prescription on limbing of trees, and essentially if our canopies are touching, what is underneath? And so when I'm talking about a shaded fuel break, right, I think about the gentleman that I met in Grants Pass that was in his 80s. He was concerned I was going to make him take out half of his trees, where he had probably his trees limbed 50 feet in the air and all of his grass cut to 4 inches. That does not require thinning down there. Rather, that is a really great shaded fuel break. And so I think the appendices is what we're going to be calling them, are these best practices. They're a way to take the code language and then adapt them to different ecotypes, different situations, so that there's a little bit more flexibility in how people can manage their property and make sure that it still meets, you know, essentially reducing ignition potential, which is really what we're trying to do.
Thank you for that. We still get a lot of questions from homeowners about spacing of trees and which trees they need to take out and which ones they need to leave. And it always seems site specific to me. And then like you were saying, you know, you don't want to take out so many trees that we really find out we're in a desert, a high desert. So that's for the residential. What about the shaded fuel breaks along the roads? Is anything changing with that?
I would say not with this code in particular. So this is a really good thing to make sure that we're super clear that because it's with the State Fire Marshal, it's with the Structural Fire Service, this is particularly focused on the built environment, right? The kind of knowing that resilient landscapes, even some strategic kind of placement of these, like I know personally those are super important, but our code will not have authority over those unless it's next to the built environment.
Thank you.
Of course.
All right, Sonia, or sorry. My roommate's name is Sonia, she spelled it the same way.
Yeah, Sonia is fine. Good morning, everybody. Good morning, Alice. Great to see you again. Just looking for a clarification. You said increase of defensible space 30 to 50 feet. Can you just please elaborate a little bit?
Sure can. Thank you. So when we look at essentially the way the NFPA breaks up their home ignition zone or home ignition zones, they essentially have it broken into three, right? Educationally, they have the 0 to 5, they have 5 to 30, and then 30 to 100. Where essentially the code language that we were required to use as a baseline, it considers one zone 0 to 50, point blank. So that is just kind of a difference in footage. And of course, it's kind of an educational hurdle that we are working on overcoming.
Craig.
Hey, good morning, Allison. How are you?
So good. How are you?
Good, thanks. Hey, so I've spent a fair bit of time trying to interpret the draft code language. And I think I've got a pretty good understanding of the tree spacing, but I'm struggling to understand the intent or lack of direction, maybe from my view on the ground vegetation. It seems really kind of lacking there. Do you think that there will be any more guidance on that, maybe in the best management practices?
Yes, I would agree. I will share with y'all and this was in my previous role at Oregon State Fire Marshal, not coordinating this program, right? The focus on trees, their distance to the home and the distance from each other without considering the ladder fuels or kind of this thinning from below type of practice, right? That we all have been practicing for quite some time. I mean, I have ponderosa pines within 7 feet of my house. And I was telling some of my colleagues, I was like, I will not be taking down my ponderosas. I will keep them limbed 40 feet in the air and nothing underneath them, but I'm not going to take out my ponderosas. And so, Craig, to the point around managing ground vegetation and thinning from below, I think this idea around how do we make it so that anybody can pick this up, interpret it, and be ready to go, but talking about thinning from below, talking about different ecotypes. So that's really where we're looking at 5 or 6 very specific ecotypes and management practices, so that then we can use those for best practices and best management practices moving forward.
Great, thank you.
Of course.
Andy.
Is it my turn?
Yes.
Hi, Allison. This is Andy Mewson with Country Financial Insurance, and I'm a fellow Lapine resident. I'm taking my questions from the perspective of the homeowner's insurance view and how this affects the ability to obtain or in many cases retain homeowners insurance in the areas we live. The biggest thing I've come across is the 10 feet spacing between trees and the subjective arguments I have with underwriters, whether that's trunk to trunk or crown to crown. If it's crown to crown, you may have, 30 feet between trees. So your map and your guidelines, what's your take on the 10 feet spacing rule? Because the insurance companies, again, use their own overlay maps, their own algorithms for determining wildfire scores. But where am I going with that? They use the 0 to 30 feet and then the 30 to 100 feet, like you mentioned, and you're just going to do the 0 to 50 feet. What's your take on the 10 feet spacing rule?
So I'll give you what it says in code, and then I will give you the best management practice. In code, it is very, very clear that it is 10 feet between canopies, not trunks. It's very, the diagram is very clear. Where I hope we can get with the best management practice is that we will be clear about what types of trees and ecotypes require that kind of spacing, versus what, essentially code is like, yes, it should be 10 feet. And, and I 100% appreciate where you're coming from is right. Like even an agent or an adjuster will go out and see one thing versus the underwriter who's not out in the field walking around. And so I think what we're going to attempt to do is take the very prescriptive canopy to canopy 10 foot and then say, okay, great. So 10-foot spacing-ish between groups of trees or trees. However, in these certain ecotypes or these certain situations, this is when it's acceptable that it can look like this. To be very, very clear. So if an underwriter, right, who is located somewhere else in the nation, they're only reading the report or the assessment from the adjuster or the agent, they're looking at whatever algorithm, risk algorithms y'all consider as a company, that then they're able to say, okay, it still meets code if it does X because it's in the best management practice. That is the goal. And so of course, right, this will just be a consistent education piece to the 30, right, the home ignition zones from NFPA versus the 0 to 50. I honestly, that is a question maybe outside my pay grade. That might be a better question for the insurance commissioner. As much as I would love for us to move to where, right, our insurance industry partners are on the same playing field, right, each individual company has their own way of doing business. They're a private company, they can do what they like. And so I think the vision is that sometime or someday, the insurance commissioner will help support industry, kind of understand why we should use statewide standard versus another one. I don't know if I can overcome that hurdle alone, as it were.
One other quick question. Trees in Lapine, as you know, some, especially the lodgepole pine, they will split to become 2 or 3 trees.
Yes.
And I argue with sometimes underwriter that say, hey, no, this is really one tree. And they're like, no, it's 3 trees. You have to cut 2 of them down, that kind of a thing. You mentioned bunches or clumps. Is a lodgepole that splits the way it does, is that considered one tree?
Right now, the way that we have it drafted, and we're going to refine it a little bit more, is that one tree or a group of trees up to 5 trees can be considered one entity, for lack of a better phrase, right? Like that's
okay.
A point. I'm hoping to see if we can refine it a little bit more by ecotype, but right now that's the way it's either one tree or a group up to 5 that's considered a point.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, of course.
So Alison, I have one more question if you don't mind me asking. You mentioned that the map would be coming out and then there would be another appeals process. Can you tell us how long that appeals process might last? And do you anticipate there being any retraction of the map if there's blowback like there was the last time?
Oof, I can give you, I do know that the appeals process will be 60 days. How my partners over at ODF decide to collate, deal with, work through all of the feedback, I genuinely don't know if they will pull the map back again. I do not know. I do know once that letter shows up and it's certified mail, y'all. So like we have to be home to sign for it or go to the post office. So just eyes open when it happens. If you're going to be in the high and wooey, myself included, I will be. Is that once you sign for that letter, you have 60 days to put your appeal in by the appeal that's outlined in the letter. That I do know that. Whether or not they'll pull it back, I genuinely don't know.
I think we're caught up.
Y'all can't possibly be that easy on me. I'm sure there's other questions.
Allison, this is Kevin Moriarty. You mentioned the fuel breaks. Now that's just gonna be a best practices. That's not really gonna be adherent to a code per se for fuel breaks.
That's correct.
Unless it's within 50 feet of a structure. Anything within 50 feet of a structure will be adherent to the code. But
yeah, so thank you for that. So maybe I'll put a little bit of a finer point on that. So if, say, like, let's use my property, for instance. I have an acre, I'm down in Lapine. And so if I am in the high hazard and the WUI, you have to meet both criteria for the code to apply to you. And that's both our code and the building code, the home hardening code. I would, by law, only be required to put in 50 feet of defensible space around the buildings that have been given a certificate of occupancy on my property. So I have greenhouse, shop, woodshed, house. 1 out of the 4 would only be required under code to have defensible space for 50 feet. Now, for me, I'm like, my shop is within 50 feet. My, woodshed is within 50 feet of it. So right, naturally, my defensible space would hit all of the buildings. But so it is COO, so certificate of occupancy buildings on properties that meet high and WUI. It will not be fuel breaks that are on a different property. It will not be vacant lots that are not built out. It won't be my neighbor behind me that only has a shop that he's only here 1 week out of the year to hunt elk. It will be places where people are living, working, congregating, all of that are in the mapped high and wildland urban interface.
To clarify, if 50 feet from one occupied household extends beyond that property line onto a different property line, is that property line adhered to that code as well? That other property?
Yep, so it is 50 feet or to the property line, whichever comes first.
Yeah, might not have 50 feet.
Yeah. As much as I'd love to help my neighbor clean up all of his treasures, I probably can't.
Now, that's only for new properties. Nothing's gonna happen with current structures, correct?
So that's a great question. And there's a very important distinction. Defensible space will be retroactive. So it's anywhere that is certificate of occupancy or ought to have been given one. So defensible space is any property that meets that criteria that's built out. The home hardening piece will only be for new construction or massive remodels. So ours is retroactive, home hardening is not.
I think we're good at questions.
Okay. COVID got me really good with quiet online. So like if there's questions forming, like I'm ready for it. I want to make sure that while y'all have me, that you have every opportunity to ask the questions that are, I'm going to say burning because I love my puns intended, but.
Anything else?
I see a hand up from Dean. Yeah, Dean, go ahead.
You're on mute, Dean. There you go.
Okay, yeah, sorry. 50 feet is the new code, and a lot of properties are in, at least South Deschutes County, they're half acre or 1 acre, but frequently a home is less than 30 feet, less than 50 feet from the property line. And it doesn't sound like we can lever that with our neighbors, but maybe that will be an incentive to have conversations.
I would agree. This is where my amazing colleague Heather comes in. This is where all of y'all and your work around Firewise and community education comes in, is that if you have somebody who only has 35 feet to the property line, that's when we start making cookies and we pursue things like Firewise, things like community chipping programs to get as many people on board as possible.
Thank you very much.
Of course. Thanks, Dean. Yeah, Andy, go for it.
Another thought or question I had is when this really started manifesting a couple years ago, reaching out to my own insurance carrier, and the rating for the increased wildfire risk and the premiums associated with that. They basically kind of said, due to the scientific data of, the east side of the state has been in severe drought for 6, 7, 10 years. And then the wind patterns are changing to a point where it's going to, tinderbox the situation if the wind changes the way it is. That's the main factor driving it. Well, is this standard, this 50-foot standard and whatnot, is it kind of a living kind of standard, meaning if the climate changes and all of a sudden we are getting more rain and more snow than we can handle on the east side for a 7-year period, will that kind of change things? Or is it just like, this is how it's going to be for the next 50 years kind of a thing?
That's a great question. So I will say there's kind of 2 checkpoints. So my understanding is that once the hazard map is out, it's adopted, the appeals are finalized, all that process is complete, they are required by law to revisit and redraw it, if any changes, every 5 years. So taking fire occurrence, weather, climate, development, XYZ into account every 5 years. For us, code is revisited, reviewed, and any edits made every 3 years. And so every single time we will be going through to revisit everything. So each of those, right, the map looks at the conditions on the ground, the hazard, where ours will look at, right, our conditions dictating that we look at more distance, less distance, where it applies, new best practices, all of those pieces. So there's a couple times that we revisit on a regular basis that are scheduled intervals for that.
Thank you.
Yeah, of course. All right, Sonia, go for it.
Okay. So we're about 100 feet up from the Deschutes River.
Mm-hmm.
Massive embankment, very steep. And the roots of the trees, now we are not really affected, but several of my neighbors that are in the same situation are affected to where their trees are within that 50-foot line of the home, but the roots are actively holding back that embankment.
Right.
So where do we go?
So I will say I am, and a lot of folks know this, I will be the last one to recommend you take out a tree unless it's absolutely necessary. So, right, this will be one, and thank you for that. Slope was another one on my list of like best practices. There are some folks that have pretty significant slope we need best management practices for. And so, right, I would just say, knowing the neighborhood you live in, got to see you a little bit earlier this year, is that right? A lot of times we would talk about limbing. We'd make sure that the tree limbs weren't touching the house. We'd talk about how to maintain erosion control and talking about, honestly, those underfuels, the brush, the grasses, anything like that, versus taking out the trees that may be holding that bank in place. And so we do not want a moonscape. That is not what defensible space is, right? That is not ever what we're going for, because erosion, invasive species insert a whole 99 problems if we take care of one, right? And so taking care of that thinning from below, making sure it's not touching the deck, it's not touching the house, it's not touching the roof, and maintaining that erosion control. But slope will be one that we try to address in best management practices for sure. Thank you. You reminded me of that one. Appreciate it.
Alison, can you explain the enforcement, how that's going to roll out and who's going to do it?
Yes, I can. So we are, like I said in the beginning, we are required by law to enforce. It thankfully gave us some flexibility in what enforcement is going to look like. And so primarily that enforcement will fall to Oregon State Fire Marshal. So our deputy state fire marshals will be doing that, or right, our local fire service partners that have capacity, very similar to Oregon Fire Code, fire investigations, similar to the way that we operate in other ways with our deputy state fire marshals. This will also function very similarly. That is something that, frankly, we're still working on how it's going to look. These are private properties. These aren't businesses, right? Right of entry does not apply to private properties. That's a constitutional right. And so for us, we're really trying to figure out how do we make sure that we meet legislative intent for enforcement, but we don't trample on constitutional rights. So, everything from, we're doing curbside and we're looking up and we're sending folks our findings. If they want a full-on educational assessment, they can give us a call. But making sure that, we are respecting kind of that knife edge that we're going to have to walk. But the short answer is this enforcement is going to look very similar to the structure working with the structural fire service and our deputy state fire marshals, the way that it currently works with the Oregon Fire Code. We're just going to have to balance that private property rights. I say only, that's going to be a really hard thing to do, but we're going to do our best to balance that. But it's going to be a very similar process, Gary.
So that process today, working with the state fire marshal's office, is usually by complaint basis. You don't actually, unless it's a licensed facility, do you go out and actually do annual inspections, because state fire marshal's office is paid by those licensing agencies. So therefore, just my guess here, it'll be on a complaint basis. So when you have one neighbor that calls up the local fire department says, no, this is a state-run program, you need to call the deputy state fire marshal in this area, then they will go out and respond to that. Is that how you see this coming down, or do you see it differently?
I see it differently. So I will say for licensed care facilities, it is similar to that, right? But I will say that, like for regular inspections, right, like I think about like our deputy that's out in like Harney County, he has an inspection schedule with all of his businesses, right? For hoods, exits, XYZ. And that is not complaint based. It's just an inspection schedule to keep up with Oregon Fire Code. Now, where it interacts with local jurisdictions that are exempt, municipalities that have the capacity to do so, I don't know enough about it. I'll get myself in trouble. But so our licensed care facilities are one thing, where our inspection schedule that folks do that then, if enforcement is needed, that's kind of a whole nother, it's just a schedule that they schedule out with business owners. So, the short answer is I see both. If we get a complaint when we're in enforcement posture, we will go and investigate that. I could also see us planning something that is more proactive, letting either whole neighborhoods, whole blocks know that we're coming, and we do them from the roadside, and maybe we do them collectively, so that we're not going on folks' private property, but we're still able to do those inspections, and then it opens up the line of communication with homeowners. But it's something that, it's going to be a delicate knife edge to walk, because that is private property rights versus the right of entry that we currently have for enforcement.
Thank you.
Yeah, of course. Jim, I see your hand up.
Okay, Allison, can you hear me?
I can.
Okay, when we do inspections for our programs, we pay a lot of attention to the 0 to 5 foot zone and ensuring that is non-combustible. And that's I'm concerned, will the 0 to 5 foot zone be addressed in the best practices?
Yes, it will be. Yes, especially with the new emerging science around how critical it is, and kind of that 6 foot depth as well as the 5 foot width. But yes, that is the plan.
Okay, thank you.
Of course.
Alison Jeffrey from Eagle Crest. We have 1,700 homes, but 90 of them have been considered high risk. When we drilled into the data to try to figure out what the difference between home A and home B next to it, what the difference is of why one is high and one's moderate, we can't figure it out. Is there someone we can call to ask questions and try to get the what the reasoning was behind the high risk assessment?
Yes, there is. So I will, I'll actually pop my email and my phone number into the chat for y'all. I will not even attempt to explain the algorithm that our partners at OSU used for that, but I do know the gentleman that did the majority of it, and he might be able to talk through that with you. His name is Andy. And so I will connect you guys, but I'll pop my email and phone number in there as well, and you guys can connect up with him, and hopefully he can shed some light on it.
Kim and Dean, questions? Jim, did you have another question?
Yes, thank you. The slope was brought up earlier, and I just wanted to actually make a comment here. I have slope on my property, and the trees. I just started by limbing the dead limbs, which is, you know, the low hanging fruit. That's the more obvious thing, and a lot of the trees ended up getting limbed up over 20 feet, and that seems to you know, protect the slope and still mitigate the fire risk if the ground cover below is treated, even though the spacing might not be exactly 10 feet. Thank you.
Yeah.
Did you have another question? No. Okay.
No, that's it. Thanks.
As far as I can see online, I think we're caught up.
Yes. All right. If that's everything on questions, Allison, did you have anything else for us?
No, I didn't.
We got
Sorry, we have one more in the room.
Awesome.
We're now going 0 to 50. That's great. What are we, what's the discussion about 50 to 100 then?
My feeling is more is more. Like if you have the space, doing more is always a good idea because, right, it still reduces that fire intensity if it's ever impacting the property. The code will not require anything past 50 feet or past the property line.
I have a question. We got several rental properties that the owners don't want to do very much vegetation work. And so with this capability, so we have to just say, who do we contact to get this mitigation done?
So I would say if it's, you know, I know, especially down in this neck of the woods, like folks that live out of state, folks that own multiple properties, things like that are a concern. And so I would maybe say that, you know, if it's a concern, and this is kind of to Gary's question around kind of this complaint-based option versus kind of proactive inspection or enforcement, is that if we were to the point where we were enforcing, we did an inspection, we would contact the property owner. That work is not up to the renter, right? The onus is on the property owner themselves. And we would have the contact for that because, right, like who owns a property is public record. And if it was an enforcement action, we would be interacting with the property owner.
Like if I say this guy's not doing right, who do I contact? Do I contact the state fire marshal?
Yes, you would when we get to that point.
Okay, okay.
Don't you dare.
I'm just asking a question.
No, it's a great question.
I mean, I'll give you Mariano's phone number. You probably should start with me. But
I'm happy to help you, you know that.
Okay, gotcha.
Craig, did you have something?
Yeah, I guess I know you might not be able to answer this, Allison, but specifically talking about the wildfire hazard map, knowing that that's based on vegetation primarily, and that vegetation is constantly changing either through treatment or lack of treatment or fires, prescribed burning, all those things. Have you heard any discussion about how frequently that's going to be updated and how they're going to handle constantly changing the application of code to properties that fall in and out of high hazard?
yes, so they do have a 5-year review cycle of the hazard map once it's adopted, right? I mean, like we're what, 3.5 years out from the initial draft anyway. So they have a 5-year adoption cycle or review cycle on that map. How we are going to, as an agency, make sure that we are flexible in inspection, right? At the end of the day, we want as many people in Oregon to do defensible space, right? I mean, that's the goal, is that if you're high hazard and moderate, you're still going to have hazard for wildfire. But I will tell you, it is something that I'm still wrestling with in my brain on, like, 5-year cycle ago, maybe I was in the high, we had a bunch of fires, or we had a bunch of prescribed burning, we had whatever the treatment is from, other work. And then all of a sudden it's no longer required of me. That is something that I am still working through, like, to be perfectly honest.
Yeah, that's a challenge.
It is.
Thanks.
It definitely is, of course.
Have any other questions?
Okay.
Thanks, we will move on. Oh, wait, what? Hold on, like.
Go ahead, son.
So just out of curiosity, and this might not even have any answer from you. We're governed by scenic river byway and land management, and they kind of tell us what trees we can and cannot take out. How is that going to coordinate with this proposal that you're talking about?
Sure. So that's a great question. So we are tracking a few kind of, frankly, conflicting areas. One is wild and scenic. One is like federally mapped wetlands. There are certain areas that, as homeowners, property owners, even if you own the property, you are not allowed to touch. And so it is something that we are frankly acknowledging and memorializing in the code itself. Like, this might be why somebody is not doing the work on this particular portion of the property. But essentially our code is not going to trump or override any sort of federal vegetation management, anything like that.
Even if it impedes, I guess it wouldn't. Never mind, I'll take that back, because we have to be back from the river anyway. So disregard. Thank you.
Of course.
All right. Thank you so much, Allison, for your time today. Appreciate you being available and giving us a nice little discussion time on the new upcoming code. So I'm going to go ahead and just move on to roundtable. And we'll start in the room, and then if anyone online has anything, we can go for the, please raise your hand and we'll go to that. Okay.
So some of the folks new to the room, we just kind of spend the last part of our meeting, just updates from your community or your organization, your agency, just kind of what's going on. Anything from Lane Knowles or?
I'm fairly new to this, and my impression is that there's such an incredible vagueness of the code and the process and when the maps are going to be done. We're working very actively in our community to try to make defensible space. The guidelines are just moving all over the place, and personally, I feel like, yeah, I want to protect my property. But with all the people employed as fire marshals and fire protection, it just seems to me something could have come together a little more succinct and more time relative in this period of time. Our association has really been working hard to try to comply with this, but it's always kind of moving around.
I'll answer that, because I'm working with Lane Knowles, and you guys have been doing a fabulous job. I'm sorry to hear that. I want to make sure that we understand that this code is that bottom line, right? That minimum standard, and you all out at Lane Knowles have already gone above and beyond that. And you're more than welcome to. And a lot of times as inspectors and code enforcement, we rely a lot on HOAs and you guys, because you have more stringent rules than we do in code. Code is very difficult to put together when you're talking federal, state, local, county. So that's why it's taking so long. Everybody has to have their piece heard. And so that just takes time. So of course, there are going to be challenges and roadblocks there, right? And so with what you guys are doing, you have a very active, first 5 feet program you guys are working on. I've come and done presentations out there. That's already meeting code. You're already there. And again, not every single house is going to want to participate. You cannot make them at this point. And so that's what we need to focus our energy and efforts on, is the people that want to do this. We educate, I'm available to come out and talk, and we educate as much as possible. And we make sure that Lane Knowles hits the basis, that minimum of code. And then we can advise on how you can go above and beyond, because there's code, right? And then there's actual life and what fire behavior does, right? 2 completely different things a lot of the time. There's that code, but that code is a state code. It goes from the west side of Oregon all the way to the east side. It's completely different ecosystems. So we have to have a very minimum, right? That's what's taking so long. So as long as we ensure, your local government ensures that you are meeting that bottom, that minimum bar, we can help you with ideas on how to go above and beyond.
Well, you've been very helpful. It's just,
I want to help a lot because it's a great place out there, and you have that thing, you have that danger. I mean, you're in the sagebrush, you're in the wind, you're in all that, and you've been doing a fabulous job. Maybe we can try to focus the energy more on the educational aspect now, a little bit more.
what I think the homeowners are looking for is something concrete, and we get pushback asking, well, what are the standards? What are the actual numbers to work with? And it seems like everything's.
They are in progress. That's all, I mean, that's frustrating for all of us to say as well. And so it is in progress. As of now, we all follow FireWise guidelines. And that's what we're going off of. FireWise and NFPA is what we're going off of. That's a standard, right? That's all black and white right there. And then there's the nuances and the best practices for each community, because each community is different. So you guys are doing a great job. Just hang in there. And if you need help with the community, give me a call. Thanks, Melissa. Thank you. Let's continue with roundtable. Anything else on Lane Knowles? Did you have anything for us?
No updates. Probably.
So the Summit West Neighborhood District of Bend is the northwest section of Bend, and the Summit West Neighborhood District Board agreed to a targeted outreach initiative that will be moving forward on to connect personally with the high hazard in the WUI neighborhoods within Summit West, and talk about FireWise and encourage them to make the shift. So myself, Guy, Neil of Shevlin Commons, and Lawrence, MFCA of Skyliner Summit, we will all be doing that outreach and program. So hopefully we'll have a few more FireWise communities in our side of Bend. We tried the wildfire preparedness seminar last year in March, and we had 4 FireWise communities before that program, and we still have 4 FireWise communities after that program. So we're just trying a different tact. So.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Major.
I'll add to it. I mean, we're in fuel season right now, so we're doing some forest health and fuels reduction. And then this past summer, Joe's team was working on neighborhood park fuel reduction assessments. And then we've been working to strengthen our partnerships with Fire, with Melissa, and just ways that we can work together and just be a little bit more cohesive managing forest health and fire fuels reduction.
I don't have much to report other than
A lot of people think that tree companies don't work in the winter. We very much do. It's just a matter of getting our trucks out of the yard. So we just have late starts. So if anybody is wanting to do fuel reductions in the winter time, we're happy to do it at a slightly lower cost to keep just our crews busy in the winter time. But now is a great time to do trims. When trees go dormant, it's better to trim then than in the middle of summer. But we're happy to help if anybody is ready to do any sort of LFR. My name's Megan. Sorry, my name's Megan. I'm with Central Oregon Tree Experts.
I don't have a lot to add. We are gonna break ground hopefully the first part of December on our OSFM grant that we received for Deschutes River Woods. We have 5 contractors that submitted proposals. We'll be looking at those this week. I hope to pick one by Friday. This is the work that's gonna be done is gonna be from little south of Baker Road all the way down to you hit Forest Service. ODOT and BNSF are also participating. For the first time, we have a really good, strong partnership with all 3 of us. So they're excited about the work and you'll see a lot of movement. Basically the idea is just to thin out some fire fuels, make that kind of fire break. There's lots of areas for starts there. We've got homeless encampments. We've got dirt bike riders that like to ride along the tracks. We've got the railroad itself, you know, sparking things possibly. So there's lots of ignition potential. So we wanted to make sure we hit that area pretty good. So it'll be a really good use of funds and that should start soon.
Okay, Greg Brandt, and I'll just say that finished up the dumpsters last week, and we had over the 21 weeks of 3 dumpsters been out there. There were 62 full dumpsters, 1,240 cubic yards of fuels that we got rid of. So that was good. And I'm also doing roadside cleanup this week and next week. So.
How does it grow back so fast? Right? How does it grow back so fast? And you did it last year?
Yes, it does. It does.
Yeah, stop watering.
So, I have an idea of something. I understand what the roundtable's about. We, Eagle Crest Properties on the other side of the resort, where my purview is, and we started in last week of August, and I've done 32 acres so far, limbing up to 6 foot of all the junipers, and to get ready for when Pat Rick comes out and does the mowing and the thinning of the brush, so that they'll be able to move a lot quicker and get more acreage done. So it's all volunteer doing that work, which is crazy. So, yeah, that's it.
Okay, and it looks like Jody online has some.
Yeah, thank you very much. So Jody Barham, I'm a co-coordinator for Oregon Living with Fire. We cover Crook, Deschutes, Jefferson, and the northern part of Klamath County. And we track the implementation of the National Cohesive Wildland Fire Management Strategy, also known as the Cohesive Strategy for short. So for those that don't know, we're just a partner with Corinne and Kevin, particularly in the 3-legged stool that makes up the cohesive strategy of restoring landscapes and fire adapted communities in response to fires. So on the fire adapted communities side, I just wanted to share that we are planning our 2025 program of work and hope to work with the Project Wildfire Steering Committee as you get your strategic objectives and program of work set for the next year as well. And then I wanted to invite any of you that live from Sun River south to Gilchrist. The Deschutes Collaborative Forest Project that I help with is hosting a community event on the evening of Wednesday, December 4th. And it's free at the Lapine Community Center on the importance of forest restoration and industry in our community. So we'll be talking about how the landscape resilience and the forest restoration work helps protect the communities in and around in the Lapine Basin, as well as support the forest products industry. So we have 3 speakers. We have Robert Newey from the Deschutes National Forest. We have Bob Madden, formerly with Bend Fire Department and a Deschutes Collaborative Steering Committee member, and then John Williams, who owns Quicksilver Contracting Company, and he is also a steering committee member. So I'll put a link to that in the chat, but just wanted to invite you all, and whether you live in the La Pine Basin or not, but particularly for those of you that live from Sun River South, wanted to invite you to that event on Wednesday, December 4th at 5:30 p.m. End of report.
Thank you, Jody. Megan.
Everyone, I just wanted to introduce myself. I'm a program coordinator with COIC, and I'll be helping Lauren Street with the Central Oregon Wildfire Workforce Partnership Program. But yeah, just wanted to say hi. I don't have any updates right now. We're going to be working on doing continued outreach to, expand our services to more folks. So if anyone's interested in getting fuels treatment done by Heart of Oregon Youth Crews, or the people to contact, which I'm sure most of you know. But happy to be here.
Thank you, Megan. Dean?
Yeah, for the roundtable report, Upper Deschutes River Communities is approximately 24 communities, and many of them are not organized with neighborhood organization, and we have 2 different defensible space programs that we've been running for a few years, and they've gotten really popular because it's helping individual property owners rather than a community. And this year we've totally maxed out our funds, and it looks like a lot of the resources that are available are more available for communities, especially communities that are firewise or endeavoring to become firewise. The only way that we've been able to help communities in that sense is because we're a 501(c)(3), we can fiscally sponsor a community, but they still have to have some level of organization, such as a road district or something. So we're looking for more funding, but like I said, most of it's going to communities, and so that's what we're up against. Thank you.
Ray, go ahead.
Good morning, everybody. And thanks, Allison, for that great presentation. Just want to let you know that we live along the Arnold Canal, and they're piping it. And my wife just told me I should tell everybody that there's no vegetation left along the canal on both sides. It creates a great fire break, but it also destroys the environment and the ecology along the canal. And as far as we know, the canal company is saying they're not going to allow any public transportation, any vehicles on the canal itself or their ditch rider road. They may even go so far as to put up gates. So it's not a public right of way. So I doubt we'll be able to use it in terms of fire.
We're not public.
Ray, we get keys for all of that.
Yeah, we get keys for those gates. We're not public, so if it's an emergency response, we can get in.
Yeah.
Oh, good. Can I get a key too?
Negative. Sorry, Ray.
Join the fire department.
Wait, so the board doesn't get keys? Oh, shoot.
Sorry, Ray.
Okay, looks like we got everyone online. One thing I wanted to add, we are going to hold a steering committee member meeting in February. That'll be on the 18th, and that's for people who hold a spot on the steering committee. So that'll just be an extension of the normal meeting. So we'll have this room until 11 that day. Those of you who are on the steering committee. And then Kevin, did you have anything to say?
No, nothing at this time. Thanks everyone for being very engaged. That was some good conversations. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks again,
Yeah.
Allison.
Thank you, Allison.
We
Yeah,
appreciate-
very good, Nelson.
we appreciate you.
Yeah,
being here.
And as always, if there's further questions, feel free to send them our way and we can try and find that information out.
Thank you. Meeting adjourned. Thank you.
Oh, yeah, and no meeting in December, so.
Yeah.
Give him the key to the booth and push that thing out the street.
Take the insurance off.